Alright, hello everybody, lesson 8. So we are solving quadratics still, and it says part 3. Okay, so we've solved quadratics by square roots, we've solved quadratics by factoring, and now we're going to learn a third way to solve quadratics, okay? We today are going to learn to solve quadratics by the quadratic formula. Okay, so our objectives, we're going to know the different parts of a quadratic formula, and we're going to solve quadratics using the quadratic formula. What I'm going to give you first here is two problems that I want you to practice. It just says solve, and it doesn't say how to solve, but hopefully on both of those you notice that they have an x squared and an x, and that you want to try to solve by factoring. So I want you to pause, and I want you to solve number 1, and then you can unpause it and see how you did, and then I want you to pause and try to solve number 2. Alright, so first, when I'm solving by factoring, remember I am going to say, hey, what multiplies to 4 and adds to 4? It's 2 and 2. Just walking through steps here, so I replaced my 4x here with that 2 and 2. Notice I moved my equal 0 to the right side, and that's fine if you want to do that. Then I factored using grouping. I got 2x plus 2's, which I then set equal to 0. Okay, so I want you to pause, and I want you to try to do the same thing with number 2. Alright, you might have noticed that, hey, number 2 does not actually factor. So the mistake here, because we are asked to solve, the mistake is that you may have written this. Oh, let me put the P first. How about I make a P instead of an R? Okay, you may have written this. If I was just factoring, yes, I would have said prime. But I was asked to solve, which means it's not actually prime, and there is actually a way to get the answer. That is where the quadratic formula comes in, okay? So I'm going to give you a chance to write these both down, so pause it and write them both down, and then I'm going to explain where it all comes from, okay? Okay, this first one, that y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. This is standard form, okay, of a quadratic. Now, instead of y equals, you will have yours equal to 0, okay? But that is standard form. Anytime that I'm talking about a, I'm referring to that coefficient of x squared. Okay? Or the squared term. Anytime I refer to b, remember, I'm referring to this coefficient of the middle term. And anytime I refer to c, I'm referring to the constant. We've talked about these before, okay, but just a friendly reminder doesn't hurt. Now, the quadratic formula, you're going to notice that each of these pieces line up, okay? X equals, okay? X equals opposite of b, okay? So I'm going to take that b value from here, okay? Plus or minus, because that's going to give me my two answers. And then it's a big square root, and everything of this is under the square root. B squared, which again is coming from the b that is up here, okay? Now this minus 4, it is just part of the formula. And then a and c come from this a and this c, okay? Then it's all over, so it is one big fraction, okay? So one big fraction all over, everything. All of that was part of the numerator. And then it says 2 times a. And again, this a right here comes from the coefficient of x squared right here. Okay, so really the quadratic formula is just putting your information into the problem. Okay, so that second question on that first page is actually the first question we are going to do using the quadratic formula. 0 equals x squared minus 3x minus 9. So we're going to solve this using that quadratic formula up here. One thing that you need to note when solving using quadratic formula, it has to be equal to 0. Okay, so it has to equal 0, okay, for it to work. Something that some have found helpful is to write down the value of your coefficient of a, your coefficient of b, and your coefficient of c. Okay, so for instance, the coefficient of a is 1. The coefficient of b is -3, and the constant is -9. so that when you go over here and you're putting this into the quadratic formula, x equals, okay? Following this formula, it says first, opposite of b. So opposite is the negative sign, and b is -3. So opposite of -3. Now, you are welcome to just put +3 right away. Okay? Plus or minus the square root. This here says b squared. Okay? So I'm going to put b squared. Well, b is -3 again. Okay? So -3 squared. Minus 4, and it's times a times c. I'm setting this all up to be multiplication. Okay? A is 1. C is -9. All of this is one big fraction. You have to make sure it's all one big fraction. All over 2 times the value of a, and a is 1. After that, put your information in. It becomes a game of simplify. Okay, so I'm going to simplify. If I start right here at the beginning, okay, it says opposite of -3. Okay, well, x equals 3. Plus or minus, and I'm going to kind of do a few things at the same time here. Okay, meaning I can do -3 squared. Okay, -3 squared. I'm going to make it so it doesn't cover my minus sign there. -3 squared is 9. Okay. Then this part right here is all one big multiplication problem. Okay, -4 times 1 times -9. Okay, so -4 times 1 is -4, and then I'm going to times it by -9, and I'm going to get a positive 36. Okay, all divided by 2 times 1, right here, the 2. Trying to color code here to make it a little bit easier on the following of this question. Okay, so now my next step, x equals, notice I'm putting x equals on every step because I'm solving for x here, 3 plus or minus the square root. I can add these together, 9 plus 36, 45, all over 2. And this is where I'm going to stop and see what I can do. Okay, so this 45 actually breaks down. See if I can simplify that square root symbol. Okay, 9 and 5. Could have done 15 and 3. It wouldn't matter. I have a pair of 3's. Okay, so that simplifies to x equals 3 plus or minus. So that 45, I had a pair of 3's, and I have a lonely 5. All over 2. Now the only thing I'm going to do here, and nothing actually simplifies, this is my actual answer, okay, but the last thing I would do is anything on the outside of my radical symbol, the 3, and the 2. I would stop and see, do they simplify? When the answer is no, that's the answer. Okay? So what I want you to do on this next question is I want you to first make it equal to 0. Alright, make sure when you set it equal to 0 that you put it in standard form. Now I want you to write down the value of a, b, and c. Now that you have your value of a, b, and c, I want you to take that and I want you to put it into the quadratic formula. So I want you to pause and then play and see if you got the same thing I did. So check and make sure that you put your numbers in the right spot. Now I want you to pause and I want you to begin to simplify. So you're going to pause and play at each step here, just kind of like I did last time. Okay, so pause and play as you simplify. Okay, when I simplified under the square root, this is what I have so far. Okay, so I'm going to simplify again under the square root. And I also simplified on the denominator as well, this last step. Okay, so under the square root, I have a square root of a 100. Okay, this is where I'm going to pick back up and I'm going to talk again here. Because now, the square root of 100 is a perfect square. It is 10 divided by 2. Do we have any square roots in the question anymore? And the answer to that is no. So that means that just kind of like before, I can actually find my two answers. My first answer, x equals -6 plus the 10, all divided by 2. Okay? And now I'm going to do the same thing with x equals -6 minus the 10, all divided by 2. So separate answers there. So I want you to pause and simplify those. Okay, so after you simplify those two separately, you get your two answers of 2 and -8. So I'm going to ask you to do similar here. I'm going to tell you these instructions are different. Find the zeros. It means the same thing here. We're still going to solve by quadratic formula. I mean, we could have solved by another method, but finding the zeros is the same thing as say, hey, solve by factoring, square roots, whatever, but find the zeros, okay? So we're still solving by quadratic formula because that's what today is about. I want you to get it equal to 0 and state your A, B, and C. Okay, here's what I have for my values of A, B, and C when it is equal to 0. I want you now to put it into the quadratic formula and see if you get the same thing. Okay, there's what I have when I inputted it into the quadratic formula. I want you to begin to simplify, so one step at a time, and check your answer as you go. Alright, so there's all the things I was able to simplify on step 1. There is everything I can simplify on step 2. And I'm going to tell you, common mistake right here is people are going to see this 6 and this 6 and they're going to try to simplify. Cannot do that at this point. What you need to do first is you need to take 168 and simplify that square root. So go ahead and pause and simplify the square root of 168. Alright, when you simplify the square root of 168, the only thing that comes out is that pair of 2's. Okay, the 2, the 3, and the 7 are all left in. 2 times 3 times 7 to give me this 42 right here. Okay, now is the time that you want to look at all three areas, meaning the -6, the 2, and the 6. Could care less about the 42, but those three numbers on the outside all have something in common, so this can simplify one last time. They all divide by 2, so that I have -3, plus or minus. You can put this one in front of the square root of 42, but you do not have to have that one. All divided by 3, and this becomes your final answer. Okay? I have one last question for you here. I want you to get it equal to 0, state your A, B, and C, and input your values in the quadratic formula before you pause and check, unpause and check with yourself. Okay? Okay, there's what you should have after doing those things. Pause again, and I want you to simplify under your square root. And I will not unpause until it's completely unsimplified. So you will notice that under your square root symbol, you actually end up with a 0. Well, what is the square root of 0? Well, the square root of 0 is 0, so you end up with this, -12 plus or minus 0 all over 8. Well, -12 plus or minus 0, well, is 0. Or not 0, is -12. Sorry, -12 plus 0 is -12, -12 minus 0 is -12. So now I actually have this, -12 over 8, which simplifies one last time because they both divide by 4 to be -3 over 2. Now, it is okay to only get one answer like that because remember, back here on page number 1 where I had you do that example, we got the same answer twice right here on example number 1. And that is the equivalent to getting one answer when doing the quadratic formula. Hey, thanks for hanging in. We'll have our live session tomorrow on Thursday, and I will hopefully see you there.